Yeah, I think I'm just really focused on how do I help individual sellers hit their quota, and then that in turn means the manager hits their quota, the director, the VP, and all the way up. So I'm very big on making sure that the tools are working for everybody. I've been there where a validation rule or not having access to Salesforce, it's just a pain as an individual seller, and so I'm really skeptical about those things. I make sure when we do have those things in place that they're not you know prohibiting somebody from doing things efficiently.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of RevOps Bites. I'm Kathryn Castle from Candybox, and today I'm speaking to Bennet Simonton, who is a RevOps professional with around 6 years of experience and a prior career in sales. And he's also the creator of YouTube channel RevOps Bennet, which we'll be talking about later on. Bennet, welcome.
Kathryn, so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. We were just talking
Thank
about how this is my first podcast ever, so very excited, and hopefully I don't make any mistakes.
I think we should aim to make at least one mistake each so that people know that we're real humans.
We have to keep it even.
Yeah.
If I make two, you have to make two.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I always like to kick off these conversations by finding out how people got into RevOps, because I think it's very rare that somebody got into RevOps on purpose. Like it's usually some kind of happy accident. So what's the story?
Yeah, you're right. I feel like most people get into it through some sort of go-to-market function across marketing, sales, or CS. I got into RevOps through sales. So it is sort of the traditional career path from BDR all the way to enterprise account executive, and saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. I bounced around to a few different companies, maybe too many times, but sort of chasing after like the higher ACV and the longer deal cycles, and of course the higher on target earnings. And so I saw, 4 or 5 different companies over the course of that period. At every company, I sort of saw the interaction with revenue operations, and I saw, teams that were highly analytical, highly technical, but I always felt like there was maybe sort of a gap between the end users and the people on the ground floor sort of selling versus revenue operations. And maybe they had a really tight connection with management and sales leadership, but they weren't often spending a lot of time with like individual sellers on the front lines basically. And so they weren't in tune with like what our woes were with our tech stack and what we liked, what we didn't like about Salesforce and all the other tools that we used. And so as I was going throughout my career in sales, I noticed this and I felt, hey, I feel like revenue operations people, if they had more of a deeper understanding of the sales process, could be a little bit more aligned with sales and go to market in general. And then I also thought that throughout my career, like what set me apart as a seller wasn't like being the smoothest on the phones. Like I stutter, I get a little nervous sometimes. What would set me apart was my ability to like manipulate all of these tools when it came to, Salesforce or sales engagement platforms like Outreach or Salesloft. There were always things that I could do within those tools that gave me a leg up. If we had the ability to create our own account list, for example, it was always like, oh, Bennett took all the good accounts because I knew how to look back at account executives who have left in the past and maybe had lower conversion rates, and I looked at all the accounts that they had lost opportunities with during their tenure and would then organize it by annual revenues and just pull all of the good accounts into my name, or in outreach be able to leverage sequences in a way that I got a lot more touch points out the door, but it seemed like really, really personal, even though it was layering on a lot of automation, a lot of automated reply emails to those manual emails. And so I felt like my ability, or even contact databases, right? I used to work at ZoomInfo. I'm very familiar with all these different contact databases and how to leverage them. So I feel like that's what always set me apart. And then COVID happened, and I felt, hey, you know what? Like, why don't I think about making this career pivot into revenue operations? And I was asking people around, what should I do? How do I get into RevOps? And there was really 2 paths. It was you take the step at your current company, right? You sort of have an analyst role open up, and you're at the company, and you're want to do something laterally within the company. Nothing like that was opening up, and so I tried to figure out, hey, what else could I do to make that leap where someone's taking a risk on me, having no RevOps experience at all. And it came clear to me that the best way to do that was probably to get a Salesforce admin certification.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of RevOps people don't want to see themselves as as admins, but if you're a one-person team, that's a huge responsibility that you need to take on, and really one of the core responsibilities of revenue operations. And so I got certified in Salesforce, which was a huge pain. I say that I would much rather do calculus over again in college than in Salesforce. And I know you just actually got your app on the App Store as well. And I've heard similar things there where it's like, I'd much rather get SOC 2 compliant than get on the Salesforce App Exchange.
Well, it's funny you say that because we just got our 2025 Stock 2 report, so I'm 2 for 2.
Yeah, yeah. Salesforce though can be a huge pain, but yeah, definitely want to learn more about the app that you just came out with. But yeah, that's how I made the jump. I got certified in Salesforce, and then got certified in like Google Analytics, and just kept on getting certifications while I was looking for jobs, and then eventually a company took a risk on me, and
Yeah.
that's how I was able to make the jump.
Great story. I bet that your previous team of sellers was happy to see you go, not because they don't want to work with you anymore, but because you were taking all the good accounts. They were like, oh man, I'm so sorry to see you go. But actually, all of these great accounts are coming back into the list.
Yeah, totally. And I just, I've been in sales for a while and not too long, but it kind of eventually I grew wanting to make a bigger impact, I felt, right? And I felt like revenue operations was a way to help everybody at a company on
Yeah.
the go-to-market side of things.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think it's interesting that you were successful using certifications to give you to sort of like build trust or credit. Because I think that the conversation around like are certifications worth it these days is a bit more like nuanced. So it's great to hear a story of somebody for whom that worked really successfully for. Because you're absolutely right, particularly Salesforce certification. No joke, they do take quite a lot of effort to get even one.
Yeah, I think I got lucky in the end. I failed the first time, and then I swear, I know, I just got lucky on a few questions and I managed to pass. But it was really, really difficult because it's so many like little ins and outs that you're never going to actually have to do unless you're fully starting up a Salesforce
Mhm.
or completely from scratch. Like, hey, if you click into this drop down, what are 3 out of your 40 options that you have? And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, like I know everything about Salesforce, but I just don't know this specific little detail. Even now, I went to go get advanced admin certifications, and I'm about as advanced as you come, and I struggled with those. I didn't get an awesome score, so it's just difficult because there's so many little things that you just aren't focusing on a daily basis in reality. But I
Yeah.
do think it's a great way of showing that you know things in depth. And for me, whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce, having the Salesforce certification, shows that you just understand like CRM concepts at a really high level. And I think that, if you're going to an org that has HubSpot, having that Salesforce certification is still really helpful in those situations as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, pivoting slightly, how do you think that coming from a sales background has shaped how you approach the RevOps function, maybe compared to people who've come in through analytics or systems, or like myself, I came from support?
Yeah, I think I'm just really focused on how do I help individual sellers hit their quota. I'm focused whenever I provide leadership, for example, with reporting and analytics, is this reporting and analytics ultimately going to help the individuals on the team hit their quota more easily? Because reporting on pipeline, for example, like you have to do those things, but reporting on it on itself doesn't actually mean you're going to be getting more pipeline, right? And so when I'm approaching revenue operations, it's always from how do I enable someone to hit their quotas more easily, and then that in turn means the manager hits their quota, the director, the VP, and all the way up. So I'm thinking about high level strategy, but how that impacts the individuals on the team, and that's sort of what I keep as sort of my North Star. So I'm very big on making sure that the tools are working for everybody. I've been there where, a validation rule or not having access to something in Salesforce, it's just a pain as an individual seller. And so I'm really skeptical about those things. I make sure when we do have those things in place that they're not, prohibiting somebody from doing things efficiently. And when we do put in, process that it's a process that's going to help people. If we need to require information that's ultimately helping the team, that drive positive behaviors. And so I'm always just constantly focused on, hey, is this going to help Joe hit his quota more easily? I think a little bit more so than other RevOps professionals who might just be high level KPI analytics reporting. I'm very in the weeds when it comes to helping people. I like to sit down with every single person. If it's a larger company, with sort of your top performers, your lower performers, your mid-level performers, people that have been there for a while, people that have moved from BDRs to account executives, all it's sort of the spectrum of people. And at a smaller company, literally everybody, I like to meet with them one-on-one, but also to shadow them and say, hey, like, you're sitting down at 9 a.m. in the morning, you have nothing else to do, you're ready to hit a cold calling campaign. Take me through your workflow. How are you using Salesforce? How are you using Outreach or SalesLoft? If you have a power dialer like Orem and Nooks, how are you using that alongside your CRM system? Where does Zoom Info or Cognism or Lucia come into play in your process? Do you have all the information that you need to have a really personalized pitch, but also maintaining a lot of speed and velocity where you can call, 50 plus people in an hour? Those are the sort of things that I'm like really focused in on as a RevOps leader, at least on the sales side in particular, given my sales background.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's an interesting approach, sort of like, because I don't know if it's like you're focusing on the individual, but every single person is part of a greater whole. So every single person you can have, operate in a more productive way or a more scalable way, or a way that just makes them enjoy their role more and they have more morale and energy. It all rolls up to like a greater sum.
Totally. All about like usability and just making systems look and feel good for people. So when they sit down, they don't feel like it's working against them. I do a lot of that in the YouTube around just like how to make Salesforce look nice, where you sit down and you feel super organized. You have everything that you need. You're not putting way too many fields on an opportunity or account that are completely unneeded. And you have like a really streamlined flow across all of your systems where layouts look very similar across Salesforce Outreach and let's say like a Nooks power dialer, so that when you're flowing across these three tools, it's all very familiar to you through that movement. So I'm very about like the cosmetics of these tools as well. I think that's a big part of RevOps is the flow of these tools, how they look and how they feel.
This is a really interesting tip, because I think that a lot of us these days, we are context switching. That's surprisingly hard to say. We're context switching between all of these different tools. So if we do make them look and feel similar, then we have more of a seamless experience rather than having to remember like, oh, where's this field in HubSpot, and like where is it in Salesforce, and where's that button in SalesLoft or Outreach. Like, that's a really good point. I actually hadn't thought about that in those words before. But yeah, again, sort of switching focus. I know from some of our previous conversations in some previous orgs, you've kind of built out the RevOps function from scratch. I'm curious, like when you were doing that, what were some of your top priorities that it made sense to tackle?
Yeah. So at previous companies, there was definitely a foundation, sort of in place. And I think that it's almost sometimes easier to build from scratch than it is to rip and replace sometimes. So I think it's an interesting sort of a middle ground. And I think that you want to make sure that you do like a really good audit, I would say, of what your current processes are. And you really just clean everything that you can possibly sort of get your hands on and start off with a really clear foundation. So if I'm starting a new org, my first thing would be to do like a field audit, right? Where we're looking at, every single field in the system. We're looking at, within Salesforce, you do the Salesforce, I think it's called field trip, where basically you're looking at like, hey, what are the percentage of fields that are underneath 5% usage? Let's then, review all these fields. I may have 400 fields in the opportunity level. Let's clean those up. Let's see where we can reduce these fields. Looking at every revenue field, I think, is really important too. And all your main sort of stage fields, for example, and all the automations that are attached to those fields, and mapping those out and making sure that those are clean. I think that the first step to sort of starting from scratch is almost just like to get down to the brass tacks of things and make sure that you feel like everything in your system is 100% working for you. Like if there's a field that isn't working, just get rid of it, or if you really need it, fix it. And those are the sort of things that I think are really important when you enter an org. Just making sure that what you have, what you're sort of standing on foundationally, is really solid. And then starting to think about, stuff that might not be beneficial for us right now. We might not see results in the first quarter, for example, that we put these processes in place. But what do we need to put in place now that would in a year or 2 years, those analytics are going to start to show us value. I think of things that are a little less clear in Salesforce, like stage over stage conversion rates or stage over stage durations. And if you find yourself 5 years down the line where you don't have a timestamp for every stage in your CRM system, you're not able to really clearly show, stage 1 to stage 2 durations and how that fluctuates, over time. Another clear one would be things like making sure that you have snapshot reporting in place in Salesforce for the things that you really, really care about. You don't want to end up, again, 10 years down the line without any snapshot reporting of your pipeline. So things like that. And then starting to think about, automations, right? And ways to automate things. So, like on the CS side of things, are you automating your renewal process? When you close win an upsell, are you making sure that upsell and the products on that upsell are being pulled instantly into that open renewal opportunity, so that you're making sure that the contract value of that open renewal is adjusting based on the upsells that you sold that year as well. I think that's starting to add on that automation once you sort of cleaned house is really important too. And then I think there's an audit of the sales tech stack when it comes to what tools you're using. I tend to be sort of stuck in the old ways a little bit. I think they had a saying back in the day that was like this like pyramid of power almost. It was like Salesforce, Outreach, Zoom Info. And I tend to stay in that mold. I think there's a saying that like no one's ever been fired for implementing NetSuite before. And I think when it comes to revenue operations systems, I kind of think of it similarly, where if for whatever reason, let's say Google changes its policies around spam detection, and you're in a situation where, oh no, it's much more hard now to send automated emails, I would much rather have the powers that be like Outreach or a SalesLoft behind me, and at least be able to say to my sales leaders like, hey, we are using the best in class tools, right? This is something that everybody is feeling right now, instead of using sort of like an up and coming AI solution where they might not have those resources to overcome those things. I do like to look at the tech stack, but I tend to be sort of the core of like the Salesforce, Zoom Info, Outreach sort of core is what I tend to lean towards there.
Yeah, like basically the tried and true, like the ones that have been thoroughly tested for all different use cases, all different types of companies. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. When you're doing these tech stack audits, other than looking at factors like this, like is this an established company? Like if the worst case scenario happens, like is this kind of the tool that I want to have in my tech stack? What other things are you looking for when you're doing that audit?
So sorry, like when I'm auditing the tech. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for gaps in handoff processes a lot of the times, right? So I see RevOps as being filler between different go-to-market teams a lot of the time. So marketing, sales, customer success, and oftentimes these leaders obviously have their teams. Of course, they have their teams, at the forefront of their strategies, right? And sometimes the gaps between teams are not necessarily as addressed, right? So I noticed when I was going to your calendar invite, for example, you had Chili Piper as like a rescheduling tool. And that's an example of a tool where it fills in the gaps between two different teams. So oftentimes, marketing is judged based off of BDR's output. That's a tool that, again, sits in the middle of those two teams. So as you go to request a demo, you are able to instantly book with a BDR. And this might be missed by a sales team or a marketing team, so it sits in that middle place. But that's an example of a tool that I really get behind. And I think that it does a lot of different things. For example, if you have a team of BDRs that are focused on inbound and outbound, a lot of their time is wasted on chasing down inbound leads and people that are no-shows and scheduling. Not only is that a time waste, but then they'll turn around and kind of say like, hey, I can't do my outbound work because outbound stinks. No one wants to do outbound. Everyone would much rather just hit their quotas doing inbound. So they'll sort of say, hey, I can't spend all this time on outbound because I'm spending all this time on inbound. And I think that tool like Chili Piper, really helps to not only increase your conversion rates, allowing someone to book a meeting with you when they want to, which helps marketing, but also helps the sales leadership sort of focus energies more on the outbound side of things as well. So I think that's an example of a gap where I'm looking to figure out, okay, when I'm auditing a system, is there gaps between teams even? that we can help to align on. AE to CS handoffs, right? Do we have functionality built out in Salesforce that is allowing us to capture all the information where hopefully we can get to a point where we don't actually need to have a handoff meeting. I've been at companies where, as a salesperson, I spent a ton of time on handoff meetings. These are companies with higher velocity sales cycles, lower ACVs, and this was like every week I was doing 2 or 3 of these, felt like handoff meetings. And so can we put in place systems that allow you to get that information into Salesforce without having to sit down with your CS team every single time to address issues? So those are just examples again of sort of this between teams, can we fill the gap with a tool or a process that helps to align everybody?
Yeah, those handoff moments, they're really like if everything is configured correctly, they're really powerful and they're a way of just like somebody quickly downloading a lot of incredibly useful information. When they're not well configured, like there's so much that can go missing. And then you have, of course, like the customer impact potentially, where I think we've all had that experience where we're like reaching out for a demo on somebody's website and nothing happens, or there's an initial touch and it doesn't go anywhere and you're like, I'm trying to buy your tool, like what would you like me to do? Or we do get through the buying cycle and then the customer success team, through no fault of their own, are asking us like questions that we've answered earlier on in the sales cycle. We just end up repeating ourselves. So like all of this to say, I totally agree with you. Like looking at those handover points and checking that you have the right tech in place and also the right processes is like really can be a game changer for a company.
Yeah, and I'm so about Salesforce being your source of truth on things. Like when I see people having like Google Docs for each one of their deals, it drives me insane. Whereas, yeah, I think it goes back to like how I differ sometimes from RevOps leaders that haven't been in sales. Is I've been in the situation where your Salesforce is like a black hole when it comes to lost opportunities, and you have an account list where 20% of your accounts have lost opportunities in the past. When you go into those opportunities, all you have is maybe like a loss reason that's like a multi-select pick list. And if you look at the loss reason notes, it's just like they weren't interested. And it's just like
Yeah,
that
or
kills.
radio silence.
Yeah, there's so much missed opportunity just from that situation of just not understanding every little thing. Or they'll have notes, but they're hidden in, like the notes object or in calendar meeting in like objects. For me, I'm just about, hey, let's get this all out of these notes objects. Let's get them out of the meeting notes. No one dives into the meetings and looks at every single meeting that you've had. We need to figure out a way to get this onto the opportunity, and so that someone can go to the opportunity, understand exactly why I was lost, look at every single step along the way, have your sort of whatever you use, your med pick or your bant or whatever, filled out and entered. And I am able to sort of put myself in their shoes. And when I'm training on this, it's all about like, this is for you. When Sally leaves the company and gives up her 100 accounts, like you're going to be really pissed when there's no notes on these accounts. It's not about me making sure that like I make your life harder. It's about when you do get new accounts, so like your life is easier.
Hmm. Yeah, I
So always
completely
focused
agree.
on Salesforce hygiene and how can, to your point about the CS stuff, like how can we make it so that a CSM can look at an opportunity and be like, okay, this is why they bought.
Yeah, yeah, I used to see this sometimes in support back in my support days because often the support platform would be kind of siloed from the CRM. And so we would have situations where we would know in support, like, oh, this customer is really not happy. They're probably going to churn. And CS would have no idea because they weren't getting those signals where they worked. And so they would do a retro after the churn happened. And it was really obvious in retrospective, like you could see all of the signs, but because things were not talking to each other in the correct way, like the right people who could have resolved things just weren't able to at the correct moment.
Totally. I'm curious, like, what are you seeing as sort of the best in class, like on the customer success side of things, tech stack right now? Like, I know there's, you got churn zeros and the gain sites on like the CSM side, and then you have on the product support, like your Zendesk and your intercoms. Like, the companies that you're working with, what do you feel like is sort of best in class right now?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things. And I won't spend too much time on this, partially because I want to hear your answers to
Sorry.
things. But a couple that you didn't mention, like all of the ones that you mentioned, yeah, still very prevalent and like definitely recommendable depending on like a company setup and their use case. But yeah, a couple others that came to mind, Vitally or Vitally, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Pylon is definitely becoming more popular. But I think maybe we could collab on like a LinkedIn carousel or something, like all of the top support and success tools. I think that would be interesting for a lot of people.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, didn't mean to hijack the interview, but that's a because going back to my sales thing, I'm less in tune, I guess. Sometimes I have to admit my weaknesses, right, on the CS side as I am with around sales. So I admit that, and I'm always trying to learn that side of things more.
Yeah, no, I think some things have changed definitely over the last couple of years, but I do think that like overall in RevOps there often is still more of a sales focus than a CS focus, but of course CS can really like benefit from RevOps attention, like processes data, like best in class tools and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think it's always a good topic for conversation. But to kind of like turn the tables back on you a bit again, I remember last time we were talking a lot about like enrichment providers and data providers, and like Clay versus Zoom Info versus various other tools, waterfalling data sources. I would love you to share any thoughts you have there, very open-ended, and also I'm interested in hearing how you personally evaluate whether a given tool is worth the cost and like the complexity as well, because some of these tools can like you can really get in the weeds with them.
Yeah, totally. I think with data, sometimes more is more in a way. So, when I was, selling data providers, we would say that, there's nobody we can't sell to because if they're already using somebody, the pitch is you need more, right? Like, why stop with what you have? Are you finding value in that? Is having the right contact information not the most important thing in your sales cycle? And if so, why not double down on that and have access to all the top providers out there? And so I take a similar sort of strategy when it comes to RevOps, and like in the ideal world, like you would be using something like a Clay waterfall, and you would have all of your best sources in that waterfall, right? You'd have your Zoom infos and your Cognisms, and you'd be stack ranking that, and that's sort of in an ideal world with an unlimited budget. You would do that. You'd figure out, okay, what are my top 3 or 4 providers? Let me buy API access to every single one of those providers. Let me plug in Clay to those providers and be able to go down the line and make sure that I'm basically making sure that I have mobile numbers for every single contact that I care about. And then maybe I'll give my BDR team access to the top provider of those providers that we have. Um, but I do think that if you're limited there, like most companies don't have that option to just say, let me just buy everybody. You do need to start to think about, hey, what are our best options. And some people are starting to move away from this, like Zoom Info is the clear winner, and they're experimenting with lesser known sources, especially with sort of the AI and scraping getting more prevalent, LinkedIn scraping becoming more and more of a thing, databases in different regions in the world because we're going more global with companies. You're seeing people that are claiming, companies that claim that they're better in Europe, and so that's undercutting sort of your traditional data providers. And then Clay now is sort of the big new topic. And I get it because Clay opens up a new sort of world for RevOps, and almost a whole new, they're claiming almost like introduced this sort of role around go-to-market engineering, right? So there is a lot of selfishly reasons why RevOps would want to incorporate something like a Clay into their process, because it does open you up to a new thing that you can have control over and a process that you can facilitate. And I think there's a lot of value to it overall, right? The idea of being able to take what used to be something that was very like manual by a BDR team, let's say, where they would go into their accounts and figure out which contacts to pull over, and they would do this in sort of like a whenever they could sort of situation, and taking that and doing it in a much more sustainable way run by revenue operations, where you're doing a total contact refresh whenever you find that necessary, whether that's every quarter or every half year or every year, sort of makes sure that you're having a lot more of a clean, hygienic CRM system. I think the thing that Clay is starting to work on is like, how do we partner with all these providers, right? How do we make it positive for them, right? Where we somehow figure out a way to have a collab that doesn't undercut their offering. And I think that that's sort of where they're at right now. So they have a lot of providers that aren't like mainstream providers, where they're sort of, I would say, sort of second, third tier contact providers that are plugged in natively with Clay. And if you want to use some of your top tier providers, you need to purchase that from that provider directly. And there's some that play nicer with Clay than others when it comes to their API access. And so out of the box, Clay, I think, has some issues that they need to address, which is the idea is you stack data sources on top of each other, right? So if data source 1 doesn't have it, then maybe data source 2 does, and data source 3 and 4, and you can stack them in a way that is either we'll do our highest quality source up front, or we'll do our lower quality sources that are cheaper. So maybe we can try to get cheaper data, and then we'll layer in phone verifications and email verifications to verify that data. Problem is that can actually get a little bit expensive when you're verifying numbers. And also, they say that they verify numbers, but you don't actually verify number. They just verify that number exists in the world, not that it truly belongs to John Doe. So I think that you can run the risk of if you're trying to get a situation where you're trying to go for cost savings with Clay, you can get a bunch of false positives in your system where you are using lower level data sources and you're getting entries for these companies and these clients, but prospects, but maybe it's not the best data. And so what I think is sort of the ultimate solution would be to purchase one of these sort of top tier 1 level data sources and integrate that into a Clay waterfall, where you have the flexibility of Clay to layer on things like LinkedIn scraping and AI within these tables, right? Where you can say, "Look, let me find the contact and then use AI to give me like an overview of this contact and figure out what their most recent job change was." That's all really super cool stuff. But when it comes to the contact data itself, I think that that's really a best practice. So to summarize it, if it was me, and I think that contact database it's the most important thing, right? I always say, if you're a salesperson, give me an Excel file with the mobile numbers of my top prospects and I can sell, but I can't sell if I don't have contact information. So when you think about it, bare bones, contact information is the most important thing in sales, and it still is, and until maybe it's all done through LinkedIn, and for right now, it's definitely still the most important thing. In an ideal world, I would do like ZoomInfo, Cognism, and then my other providers in Clay in the United States. And then I might flip that in Europe and do Cognism, ZoomInfo, and then all my other data providers.
Hey, amazing. That was all great information. I'm sure tons of people, including myself, have something to learn from that.
Yeah.
So I think we have maybe time for one more topic, and I personally would love to hear more about your YouTube channel, RevOps Bennet. If I remember correctly, I think you started it relatively recently, but I would love to hear, why did you decide to start the channel? What kind of things do you talk about? And like, what has the experience been like so far? Any, learnings?
Yeah.
Wherever you want to start.
I'm definitely a clout chaser, that. No, I think that there's always sort of this entrepreneurial side of me that I've always thought about, like, should I start my own company? Like, let's start a coffee stand with my brother, or, let's do a hairspray or whatever. And we're always bouncing ideas off each other, but we've been doing that for like, 10 years. We haven't fully made the step to actually making a company like yourself. And that's sort of what kind of got me into this. I wanted to do something that was in that realm, and I felt like the YouTube channel it's not a business, but it's you're something sort of like theoretically you can make money on it. I don't think the RevOps sphere based on the other channels out there, it has like a big enough following to actually capitalize on advertising in that way. But I think that it's a cool way for me to express sort of what I think I'm really good at. And to learn things like what video cameras are the best to use, what audio to use, what lighting do I need to use, what tools do I use to edit videos? Like when I see these crazy YouTube videos that have all these different graphics and animations going around, like how do I make that? And I think that whether that's for the YouTube channel or for the product I make in 20 years when I'm creating my first like Instagram advertising campaign for it, like that sort of skill set, Photoshop, right? Like you need that for YouTube. That sort of skill set, I think, is really interesting. So that was part of it. The other part was I kind of wanted to get my ideas out there into the ether and show people, what I thought were best practices in the RevOps space, and start to just grow my network of revenue operations leaders, so we can bounce ideas off each other and learn from each other. And I think that sometimes you get very head into your own org and you don't like spend enough time looking at other organizations. And I think that this is sort of a step towards that path for me of really collaborating with a lot of other RevOps leaders and sitting down and figuring out, okay, like what works for you? How do you handle these situations? Should I be doing things differently? And yeah, I think that the channel is a step in that direction. It's just a cute little channel for now. It just does like things like my 3 things I don't like about Salesforce and how to solve them and all that stuff. And I think like the next video I'm going to do is around like how to get into revenue operations, for example.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I've only seen a few of them, but your thumbnail and editing game is very strong. I'm jealous. I aspire to your skills there.
I've realized it's all about stealing other people's ideas. So I just go through YouTube. I find the people that I think are doing it really well, and I tend to emulate what they're doing. And once you get your style down, like you get your thumbnail style, then it becomes a lot easier to just keep doing it. Or even with editing, it's like, okay, I know that when I'm bringing in a font, this is the font I want to use. And with this animations, in this color, now that I'm sort of getting to that point of like realizing what my aesthetic is, it's a lot easier to do it. But in the beginning, it was like, okay, I have to go through all these different fonts to figure out which one I like. And it was a really slow process.
Yeah, I guess this is why they say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. That's how it goes, right?
Exactly. It's like nothing I say in revenue operations is probably that original, right? Like I've learned from people, I've learned from sales leaders,
Yeah.
marketing leaders, RevOps people. And so definitely stealing from a lot of people. Even with like when I was a salesperson, the first thing I'd do when I get into an org would go into outreach and I'd find my top account executives or BDRs, look for all their sequences and just start cloning and copying and pasting into my sequences. And
Yeah.
of course, I would redevelop their words, but I try to foster that within my orgs as well, even now, right? Where it's okay, we're all trying to steal from each other. Let's make this as easy as possible. When you have a new way of pitching the product based on like a case study that came out or way to overcome an objection that you just started to use for the first time, like put that in Slack, show everyone that what you're able to do. We can, not only does it make you look good, but we're all able to benefit from those things.
Yeah. My cat's making an appearance. I think he's telling me it's time to wrap up so I can feed him.
And it's still the show.
So Bennett, thank you so much. I personally feel like everybody should go and check out your YouTube channel, RevOps Bennett, and I will link to it in the the episode description. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. It was great fun chatting with you again, and yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kathryn. I really appreciate it. It made me feel important to be on a podcast. So it's a big deal for me. And thank you again.
Yeah, I hope that your very first podcast experience was a positive one.
Yes, it can only go downhill from here.
All right, thanks everyone.